Good morning, everyone. It's a real pleasure to be here. I'm Natasha Warikoo. I'm a professor here at the Graduate School of Education. I'm going to put this down so it's not in my face. It's really exciting for me to be here. I've just come back from a research leave, and while I was very productive with the research, it's great to be back with the students and teaching and feel that energy. So I'm looking forward to getting to know many of you. My research here at my research and teaching here at HGSE is on race, immigration, and inequality in education. And I want to talk with you today about how to think and talk about race and racial inequality. Most of what I'm going to talk about is from my book, The Diversity Bargain. And now, let me just say at the outset that I know many of you may know that Harvard is under a lawsuit related to admissions. I want you to put that aside. We're not going to talk about that. But what I do want to talk about is about the why of diversity and affirmative action. In my research, I've studied how students who make it into our country's top universities, the most elite, and in the UK as well, make sense of admissions, race, and inequality more broadly. I want to talk about affirmative action today and how students make sense of affirmative action. So we gathered interviews from undergraduates attending Ivy League universities in the United States and Oxford in Britain. We talked with students about their views on admissions, meritocracy, race, and fairness. We asked students, among other things, should your college consider, race or ethnicity in admissions? And it turns out that a majority of students said, yes, this is good, that we should. And if you believe in affirmative action, you think this is a good thing. And they were more likely to support affirmative action than most adults in the United States. They said things like, these are all pseudonyms, a student I call Elliot, who said, let me see, sorry, I can't see this. I didn't think so. Can people hear me? I think you can see it. I didn't think so before I got here. I think so now because different groups of people, I've had a better experience because they provided me with insight that I otherwise wouldn't have. There's plenty of research to back up Elliot's view that diversity enhances our learning experience, and I'm sure you're going to experience this at HGSE this year. Research shows that it not only improves our racial attitudes, it also improves cognitive capacity, decision-making, even future civic participation. There's a lot of research on the benefits of a diverse learning environment. So his view really, and many students like him, really resonate with this research. That's the good news. But the troubling news is that students rarely mention the reason that affirmative action was instituted in higher education back in the 1960s, which was to address racial inequality. So there's little recognition of racial inequality, and we saw this in the ways that students think about race as well. And in fact, many students, especially white students, had a hard time making sense of any kind of racial inequality. And I call this lack of attention to racial inequality led to something that I call a diversity bargain. And that is that most white students supported affirmative action, but they did so because it benefited themselves, and almost exclusively because it benefited themselves through this diverse learning environment. So you think, okay, well, that's okay. They don't acknowledge racial inequality, but at least they support it, and they recognize the benefits. But this justification absent an understanding of racial inequality has some troubling consequences. And I'm going to just talk about two today in the interest of time. So the first was that what I call an integration imperative. There was this sense that many white students had that their Black and Latino peers had to always integrate on campus. So when they saw, a table of Black students in the cafeteria, they would get upset and say, well, why are they self-segregating? And that's not helping us kind of gain from this diverse learning environment. And so what they didn't understand is why minority-dominant spaces might be important for students of color on a predominantly white campus. And again, the lack of understanding of racial inequality led to this misunderstanding. The second consequence, so here's a quote from a student who said, students self-selecting on campus really bothers me because it makes it really difficult to get to know people because I'm not in any of those. Like, I'm not going to join the Black Students Association. And notice this student is expecting her Black peers to enter into other majority white spaces, but she's not going to enter into the Black dominant space of the Black Students Association. So this integration goes one way under this way of thinking about affirmative action. The second The second consequence is that there are worries about what some students call reverse discrimination. When students see affirmative action as something to benefit themselves, then it should not be seen as going, quote unquote, too far as to appear to disadvantage whites like themselves. So one student said, if I hadn't gotten into Harvard, I would have felt I'd been discriminated against. The student who got into Harvard, the top university, I shouldn't say top, one of the most difficult universities to get access to. I would have felt that I'd been discriminated against if someone else that I knew and who was equally qualified and who was a minority, if they had gotten in over me. So there's this way in which affirmative action becomes an easy target for explaining any not winning a competitive process. You can think about that, this student going on to apply for jobs and internships and what they might think if they don't win. So this problem with thinking about affirmative action as part of a diverse learning environment is that it masks racial inequality, and it has these consequences. Now students of color, I should say, didn't see themselves as responsible for their peers' learning, and nor should they be. They too appreciated diversity on campus, but like their white peers, they were focused on their own learning and development and not of their peers. Now, this is problematic because these expectations of students of color and beliefs about reverse discrimination can be harmful to race relations on campus and to students of color in particular. And I want to suggest that without an understanding of racial inequality, it makes it really hard to make sense of racial violence, of campus protests related to race, questions of safe space, the historical roots of white supremacy that's on the rise in the United States today. So this view, without understanding inequality, I think is problematic in many ways. So I want to leave you with 4 messages about what we can do about these misunderstandings and the effect that they have on race relations on campus. And I hope you'll take these forward into your year here at HGSE. Whatever your ethnic or racial identity and wherever in the world you've come from to Cambridge today. First, learn about the history of 20th century excuse me, I'm sorry, I don't have this on my notes. Learn about 20th century American racial history. There's so many instances in the 20th century that most of us don't learn in school, where supposedly race-neutral social policies have systematically excluded African Americans from the American dream. And Native Americans have been displaced. Learn, too, about ongoing racial injustice, how it continues, and what role you can play to reduce its presence and impact. Second, engage with each other. This is incredibly important, and Rick alluded to this earlier. Know that you will offend and you will be offended. And if that doesn't happen to you this year, then you're probably holding back. And I encourage you not to hold back. But also recognize that we will all make mistakes. I make mistakes. We will all make mistakes. We need to also be able to forgive each other when we do. Be courageous, have courageous conversations, and engage in what my former student, Janine DeNovaes, calls brave community in the classroom. Treat the classroom as a space in which we all come to learn and grow together. Third, join affinity groups when you need to. This is especially important for students of color. Find spaces where you can have sources of support and people who have similar experiences to your own. White students recognize that your peers will not always be ready to engage, and really think about when you do and when you don't. But don't stay there. It's important to, again, come back together and have these difficult conversations. And the last message I want to leave you with is to provide these opportunities to your students going forward, or whoever you're working with. Well, those of you going into schools, if you're working in universities, in whatever capacity, your collaborators in the workforce, your peers, your coworkers. When you leave HGSE, create opportunities for others to do the same things I've just described, to learn about racial inequality in the United States and its history, engage in interracial dialogue, and develop affinity groups as needed. So I wish you a great year, and I'm excited to get to know many of you, and I hope we can continue this conversation. Thank you.